we notice here that this young man was essentially of goodwill, and the Lord gazes into his soul and loves him. It is the gaze that we try to exercise every time a soul is before us. We do not judge, we do not condemn, we hope. But having said that, we do observe the reality that the situation of this young man is repeated over and over again. It is very sad sometimes when one is exercising the ministry of reconciliation and one comes across some barrier to absolution, and one asks whether the person is able to break, to get away from the immediate occasion, often a person, and they're not willing to. And because the situation might be ongoing, visible, and therefore irregular, one cannot proceed to what their soul is crying out for. One cannot absolve as a rubber stamp in such a way as to encourage to go back. It has to be coherent. Otherwise one is doing that very thing which irritated most Padre Pio. He used to talk about bandying about the precious blood. In other words, easy forgiveness without anything involved. One can't come to God and say, "Forgive me," and have in one's mind the intention to carry on just the same. And if one does go into that mode, one goes into that other serious illness which classically is referred to as hardening of the heart. Why? Because the conscience, after a while, no longer reacts. It is deadened. Does that sound vaguely familiar? In our day, in Ireland, consciences massively deadened. Just before I came, Father Michael called out of the blue, Father Michael Cahill, and was somewhat distraught about what had happened over the weekend, and communicated some of the scenes that had been seen in Dublin. And I was listening carefully to his report, and because of the calibre of people present, witnessing and going along with it, I mean heads of state or whatever, I thought to myself, this is of a different order. Here we seem to have, on the level of a nation, the illness of hardening of the heart coming in, and indeed, not just hardening of the heart, but a positive desire to remove from his throne the Creator of all. What is happening in our day is that we are witnessing right before us a situation where a massively Christian Holy Land with a glorious tradition is in the process of asking God to go away. We can run this country ourselves. Thank you. Okay. Like spoiled children, we can try, but we will see the consequences of trying to run this show without the only one who knows how to. Priests have a lot of experience precisely in listening to pain. And one of the greatest sources of pain in a soul is the pain of conscience. It's there in the early stages of a soul gradually going into darkness. It's there quite a lot. And then this sets in, the hardening, where it becomes dormant, doped and dimmed. Often through an accentuation of what distracts it from itself, sensuous pleasure, things that absorb it completely, so that it's not faced, thought about, and precisely felt. Now this is part of the process which the demon is trying to do in every case of a soul on earth, trying to win that soul over for him. People think that by, in some way, mocking and rejecting and pushing aside that which has been classically considered normal, and its author, therefore, that they are actually strong people. Actually, what is happening is this. They're becoming noisier and noisier, and indeed ever noisier and noisier, in a vain attempt to get away precisely from their conscience. We are getting to the stage whereby we can create a morality which allows us to do things. What happens at the moment of death is that the noise stops. I was in retreat last week in a monastery of total silence, with perpetual adoration day and night, meals in silence and complete solitude. And there was no noise, not even the immediate noise of the cybersphere or the telephone. It was nature and, yes, the unchanging peace of the centuries and eternity. And there one sheds the distraction. And books become important because they're the only voice in the cell. Thoughts become felt because one can hear them. And one sees where one is going and where one has been since the last retreat. One also sees time passing. As Dylan Thomas said in Under Milk Wood, time passes. Listen, time passes. I jump back. The average human being in Ireland right now doesn't want to hear that. He will do anything rather than face that dangerous, dangerous silence. I picked this up actually by chance before going on retreat, and so I had time to think about its message. It's called Hungry Souls, and they are testimonies of the borderline between life and death. Souls who have not made it, or souls who are stuck. It's serious stuff. And the frontier between these souls and ourselves is sometimes not as dense as one thinks. We priests are sometimes asked to celebrate Mass in a house where things are going wrong, things that go bump in the night. But there are other cases too. There are specific cases of spirits coming back. There is a Dominican house somewhere I heard of in Ireland where a strange thing had happened. It was an old house, and there was a contact with pre-Reformation Catholicism there. And there was one room in that old building which was spooky. cold, and things always going mysteriously wrong inside it. And because they were priests, they dealt with it as they had to, with all the means they had. But it wouldn't stop. What was the matter with this room? Eventually, by some permission from on high, they were given to understand that they had to make an opening in the wall, and they did. And they found a hidden corner of it, since plastered over, and an object hidden inside it. It was a notebook. It was a book of Mass intentions. What had happened apparently was that under persecution they'd hidden it in this corner to get rid of any evidence that they were priests. But it was still there. And the priests in question were stuck until the Masses in that book were offered. And so it was sorted. Another day, and this is more recent in time perhaps, there was a priest saying the office actually in his room, downstairs I believe, may have been the sitting room, because there was some kind of comfy chair there, sufficiently big to lose things inside it. And there, while in prayer, he was frightened out of his wits, because a priest sat before him and pointed to a deep corner in the big chair he was sitting in, and to rummage until he found something. It was exactly the same thing, a book of Mass intentions. That priest was stuck until those Masses were offered. Another time, a priest went to lock the church and went into his room. But when he got to his room, he realized he'd forgotten something and went back to the church to do what he had to do before finally retiring. When he opened the door of the church, he was frightened out of his wits. The church was full of people. He asked them, "Who let you in?" They looked straight through him towards the sanctuary area, didn't acknowledge him and didn't reply. "Who let you in?" He looked straight through him at the altar, the tabernacle. He went into the house, confused. Eventually he went back to close the church altogether with the intention of mentioning it to a priest friend the following day. When he got to the church, there was no one there. It had all disappeared. The next morning he went to his priest friend, who listened carefully to his story, as he wasn't inclined at all to hallucination, and he believed him. And he proposed this solution. Well, probably what you were seeing were the souls of people who had been praying in that church and had been doing the opposite of what they were doing there before you. They had been talking before that altar, talking before that tabernacle, and they were doing a part of their purgatory there, but they had offended the Divine Majesty. Is Mary here? Mary Duffy? Yeah. Shall I tell that story you told me? Yeah? I don't know if I know the friend. It's a friend of Mary's who said this not that long ago. It was a very moving story because it's from the horse's mouth. She was praying in a church, a big church, the big church of this diocese, and she found that because of the huge volume of the church, she hadn't noticed they were locking up, and she was stuck. inside this big church, the big church, and couldn't get out until they opened it the following morning. So she made the best of a bad job, tried to find something she could put her head on and drop asleep. She rummaged around, and the softest thing she could find was a cushion inside the confessional. And she actually went into the confessional and drew the curtain and dropped off. It could have ended there. About midnight, she detected that there was something happening. She had the courage to pull back the curtain of the confessional, and she was frightened out of her wits. As she looked towards the high altar, she saw that there was apparently high mass going on. It was complete. All the ranks were there. There was something not normal. They were not standing on the ground. What does she make of that? She didn't know what to make of it. There was no way she was going to try to communicate with them as she tried to get back to sleep. Whether she did or not, I don't know, but eventually she got out the following morning when they opened the cathedral. But, again, probably, the explanation is not dissimilar to the other case. What was happening there was that, as we know actually from this business, some souls were making part of their purgatory there where they had offended. So probably down the line there had been irreverence or whatever it might be at that altar. And that souls involved were making reparation there where they had offended. At least those souls were given their chance to make reparation and were not stuck forever, we hope. But this book also contains the other category, and that's scary. Even this category I've just spoken of, souls who leave traces. Got pictures of this in this book, lots of them. Souls who are in purgatory, who come for help and leave a mark, a burned mark. But there are others more serious. One day I was at Monte Oliveto, the mother house of the Olivetan Benedictines, not far from a monastery, and I was talking to a young Vincenzo priest, a good man, and he, for some reason, came out with this story. A place in Italy where there's a prie-dieu, a Nila, which had to be taken in haste from Paris, I think, away from where it had happened, because there would have been too much danger of things getting known. What it was this. On this Nila, there was a terrible thing to be seen. A part of it was completely burnt by an imprint of a hand. Apparently what it was this. A young man was having an affair with a married woman. He himself was a man of faith, but had got caught in this precise situation where he didn't have the will, the power to get out of it. She, alas, died unexpectedly and without having had time to get her act together. He was sorry in his heart of hearts about what had happened, and he was actually praying at this Nila. And what was his shock when this person was of a certain elite, hence she would have been known, appeared before him, burning terribly. And she said this to him: "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." But that was the other side, but there's no coming back. Now, all this to collocate in its true ambit what's going on in Ireland this weekend, we think we're great, we've grown up, but actually we're big children, spoilt, rotten, who think they know better than their huge parents, but not realizing that one day they can't get away from the consequences of life without him at all.